You got the Mac and Mac guys here on Birds 365, and we've got our boy from down the shore, Mike Gill from the Sports Bash, 97.3 ESPN, jumping in with us. What T-shirt we got on today, Mr. Gill?
It's a repeat. It's the Vanderbilt.
That's all right.
I bring it out every once in a while.
I'm a big Vandy guy.
I saw a friend of mine was down in Nashville, I guess this weekend maybe. So I brought it back out.
Here's my biggest Vanderbilt question. It's probably stupid, but it is supposedly a highly rated educational school.
Oh yeah.
That is correct. How the hell did Jay Cutler ever get there?
Because football's a little bit different.
Yeah. Well,
always.
Yeah, one of the reasons I visited Vanderbilt, I also coached a kid that had committed to play baseball at Vanderbilt.
Ooh, that's a really good baseball school.
Yeah, they're a big baseball school. So, no, I don't have the answer to the Jay Cutler question.
Yeah.
By the way, Jay Cutler is very entertaining. He's very witty. You'd be surprised.
Wasn't he going to do Fox? Was he going to be a color analyst?
Yeah, he was. I'm telling you, Jody, he's very smart. He's very funny. He's very witty.
How'd that Fox gig go for him?
I don't think he ever did it.
He went back to play. And the weird part was he went back to play, and then you would think they would have put him on one of the teams like down the road. They never did.
Yeah. Strange. He was doing that reality thing with his former wife too. So maybe that got mixed into the muck, so to speak. But yeah, I think you'd be surprised how well-spoken Jay is.
See, Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
He was
great arm too. Great arm talent.
He could throw. Yes, he could throw. Yeah, that's why he's not a color analyst, because he wasn't the level of a Vanderbilt student. Would be my John. You may have dealt with him more often than I have, but I've heard Jay Cutler speak. I've seen Jay Cutler act. Yeah, he's not a Vandy man. Never was, never will be. He may have gotten there, may have helped them win some football games, may have kept them from being 3-10 or whatever. How many?
Who's your first Eagles thought when you bring up Vanderbilt? I know mine.
Vandy?
Jordan Matthews.
Jordan Matthews, yeah.
Okay.
Jordan Matthews.
One of the Eagles' best drafted wide receivers under Howie Roseman, and that tells you something.
By the way,
Jordan Matthews is one of the best. That means Howie isn't great at drafting wide receivers.
And Jordan's very smart, very well spoken.
That I believe.
So he's a Vandy guy. One of the great lines of all time when he went to Buffalo and he said he had a Buffalo baby because there's nothing else to do in Buffalo. Great line.
That's right.
Good on him. All right, Mike Gill, did you watch the Fletcher Cox retirement gathering yesterday? Did you learn anything about Fletcher? Do you feel better about losing Fletcher, who John mentioned they're okay because they've got depth there, but they've added absolutely no one in Fletcher's place? Not that you're going to be able to add a player who's going to step in and be your most consistent player on defense like Fletcher was for the Eagles last year, but feel better, worse about Fletcher walking away after seeing him tell you why he's no longer going to be an Eagle?
Well, it's funny. I had Fletcher on at the Super Bowl, and it was really, interesting because I think you guys were talking about before, John, he likes to go out hunting and just kind of people always, and I think you guys were talking about this before I came on, take for granted that if you play at that level, that you were just immersed and love the game. It's not that they don't immersed and love it, but there's so many people, think back to just playing in little league sports or junior football league, where you had a kid on your team and he was really good. He just didn't give a shit. And it's not that Fletcher Cox didn't or they don't. It's just some of these guys, like it's always like the funny part is there's a guy who's really good. Chase Utley should be the manager. Chase Utley doesn't want to be a manager. A lot of these guys who are so
he's the backup catcher, the backup quarterback.
Some of these guys that are so good, they're not fanatically into the game like we are. They just happen to be really good at the game. And I think Fletcher Cox is one of those guys that just happened to be really good at this game. He doesn't have to live, eat, breathe, crap the game. And I think he's just when we talked to him, he said he didn't know but you can kind of get a sense that he was like, you know what? I'm pretty happy doing what I'm doing right now, which is hanging out in my camo hoodie, walking around, waving to people.
Ranching. Yeah.
I think I've had enough of this. And how do they replace him? Well, they've been working towards it. They took a defensive tackle last year. They took a defensive tackle the year before. Milton Williams the year before that. So if they're not equipped, shame on them. I mean, they've been building towards this moment. And, you know, we were talking about this because of the on my show, Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson, WrestleMania run-in. And, you know, Lane Johnson's going to start looking around saying, man, all the guys I grew up in this place with, it's not the same anymore. And I said, it's like one of those trips that you took with your buddies. And one of the guys got married and he stops going on that trip. That trip's not the same anymore. Hey, we used to do this trip every year. And that guy's not here anymore. And these four guys, they're not the guys that I went on this trip for. I wonder when Lane Johnson starts looking around and saying, man, all the guys I played with, they're dropping. I know he's got 3 years left on his deal, right? Is it 3?
Yeah. And he talked about, you know, a couple years ago, he said he had probably 2 years left and he keeps extending it. He keeps playing at such a high level, but he knows BG's leaving too. This is the farewell tour for BG.
Yeah.
So he'll
That
be the last
thought,
one
though,
standing.
Jody.
Yeah.
That was my thought is Fletcher probably could play again. I would imagine if he hit the free agent market and really wanted, if the Eagles said, look, we're just going to move on, I'm pretty sure he probably would have got another job. I think he just said,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I think he wanted to finish here. I asked him that question yesterday. He wanted to finish here, and he saw, you know, the Eagles are so well stocked at defensive tackle. I don't think he wants that limited role that Brandon Graham has. I wondered with Jody, and I'll ask you, Mike, if they didn't make all those investments at defensive tackle, I think he might be back. I think if he had a larger role, I can't prove that, but I think he might. I think he's got plenty left in the tank, but he didn't want to go somewhere else. He could have went to Pittsburgh last year. He could have went to the Jets.
yes, yeah.
He didn't want to go.
Well,
he didn't want to go anywhere else.
At what point, you know, like you said, he doesn't want the role that Brandon Graham had, but do you think he would have been that diminished? Like last year?
No, but I think he would have been diminished, and I don't think he wants to be that. I think he wants to be the guy.
Okay, so diminished for what reason? Because of they just want to get Jordan Davis more time. They want to get Jalen Carter more.
They want to get Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, and Milton Williams more time. All of them. And by the way, they need to show the conditioning to be able to handle that.
Right. That's what you've said it twice now. They're so well set at that position. With two guys that ran out of gas in the second half of the season. Now they flashed, and Carter flashes on the highest of high levels. He makes highlight plays that'll be in the entire NFL highlight film. And then he ran out of gas. And once again, for the second consecutive year, Jordan Davis ran out of gas. And you don't have Fletcher Cox there to at least stabilize when potentially this could happen again next year. I understand they used 2 first-round draft picks on him, but just saying, well, they'll pick up the lost Fletcher slack is, I think, take a little risk there from an Eagle perspective.
Yeah, it's a little risk. It maybe, hey, Fletcher was just walking away. Maybe it's Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is the right one. And maybe he just wanted to walk away no matter what. But I do think that I rarely talk about Marlon Tuipulotu. They probably want to get him some more snaps, and they like Moro Ajomo, so it's even more about now the big 3 as well. They're pretty well stocked at that position. Are they? This goes back to Jim Schwartz days, where the Eagles would say, Mike, and I've been talking to you for years about this kind of stuff, where they would say, well, we got to start getting Fletcher on more of a pitch count. We got to limit. He plays too much and this and that. And every year roll around, every game, they want him on the field in the key situations. So he keeps playing this massive amount of snaps. And one thing he did say yesterday is he feels healthy. He feels good. He didn't go down the Kelsey route where he's all banged up and it's such a grind. He said he feels pretty good physically. So who knows? But I think if he were the top defensive tackle on this team, that's what I'm saying. From a standpoint of the Eagles inside the building, thinking that, I think he might be back. I'm not positive, but I think he might be back.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird because as we said, somebody drafts a player at your position and you start to say, well, why'd you draft a guy at my position? We hear this a lot, especially at the quarterback spot. They kept drafting defensive tackles. You never heard Fletcher Cox say, what are you drafting a guy at my position for? So it's interesting that he may perceive that he wasn't the top guy. But I'm wondering if, like last year, what did he get paid? Like $10-12 million for the 1 year?
Yeah, 10.
At what point
10.
It was a pretty big bundle. The 1 year they cut him, and then they brought him back for a pretty big number. And then last year they brought him back for another pretty big number for 1 year. And you wonder, did he not want to, like, were they saying, hey, we'll give you $8 million, we'll give you $6 million? And he said, you know what? It's not worth it for me if I'm not going to make the number that I want. Was that a possibility? I don't know.
Yeah, that's always, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure he doesn't want to go down to the Brandon $4 million. Yeah, he's definitely not doing that. So finances are always a part of it.
But he might have said, I'm going to get paid less than what you're going to end up using me. I'm going to get played a lot. I'm going to be a pretty high value guy.
That could be it.
You got a point there, yeah.
Right, and you're going to pay me.
That was great. You know who's the greatest? And I was talking about that yesterday with Jody and Haason Reddick, and I'll get to Haason about the money, but Jason Peters. Remember at the end, Jason Peters, remember they're going to move him to guard?
Oh, the guard move, yes.
And then was it Dillard who got hurt?
He got hurt, and they had to bounce him back.
And they had to bounce him. And Jason's like, they kept him at guard. We're asking Doug Peterson, why is Jason still at guard? Because he was basically saying, if I'm a tackle, you're going to pay me like a tackle. That's in training camp. He's like, I'm not moving.
That's akin, Jody, to the midday guy getting moved to mornings and then saying, hey,
right.
You want me to get up earlier? You're going to have to pay me more, man.
Yeah. So Josh Allen, just this morning, the Jags, Josh Allen, not the Buffalo quarterback. They're both great in their own respective realms. Just signed a deal with the Jags. He was obviously under the tag. 5 years, $150 million, $88 million guaranteed.
Whoa.
Now, obviously, these are first numbers, and we all know how that works. It's not going to look that good on paper when it comes out, but he got a monster deal. In theory, $30 million average annual value. That sort of that rising tide mentality of Haason Reddick. So we're talking about the Eagles and the trade of Haason Reddick and why they did it. This is an example of why they did it. I don't think Haason Reddick would have been happy here. Forget about $14.5 million, but even 18, 19, 20 million. Does a deal like this kind of clarify things at least a little bit, make it clear?
I think we all understood what was going on, is that he wanted the deal done. The Eagles said, we're not really interested in it. I think it's just the handling of these things is where it gets kind of interesting. Is would he have held out? Okay,
can't hold out. He can hold in, but you can't hold out anymore.
Exactly.
Well, you can do whatever you want.
You can do whatever you want, but would he come up and would he be unhappy? What does that mean? If he's unhappy, is he not giving any effort? Is he, those are the things that, Dan Hurley wins the national championship. He's on, I guess, 60 Minutes or some show where they're asking him these hard-hitting questions, and he says, we don't need the most talented guy. We want, we don't want the parent who's going to be a problem. One guy can ruin the locker room. Was Haason Reddick going to be that guy? And they would know more than that. Like, they would know more than us that if we brought him back, it just wouldn't have been worth having him here with how he would be handling not getting what he wanted. And that's something we'll never know. How would he have handled being here, playing under that contract that he clearly didn't want, and knowing the team didn't want to give him more money? And we all have talked to our bosses at one point, I'm sure, and said, hey, it's time to talk about a deal or more money. And they tell you, well, we just don't have it. Well, I know you're lying to me. Is that enough for me to not perform my job? And that's what we just don't know.
And we'll never know. You're right, because it didn't happen. But we will be able to compare Bryce Huff to
That we will. Yep.
what Haason Reddick did for this team, because they chose Bryce Huff over Haason Reddick. They didn't want to jack Reddick up to what was the going rate for the top of the level defensive end. They got Huff at less than that because Huff's done it all of 1 year. He doesn't have the track record that Haason Reddick has, and that is the way salaries are determined in part. What you've done, you try and balance with what you've already done and what you're projected to do going forward. Well, then Bryce Huff better be Haason Reddick at least, if not Haason Reddick plus, since you paid him more than you were scheduled to pay Haason Reddick. You think Bryce Huff's going to be able to deliver those kind of numbers for the Eagles?
Well, that's a great question, and I think you're right, Jody. What they selected over was Bryce Huff's birth date is what they picked, right? Essentially, they liked his
Hate him
age.
for being young. Yes, that's exactly what happened.
It's a young man's game.
Yeah, they're taking a gamble that Bryce Huff's age will allow him to be a more productive player over the time of his deal. I said the day of the signing, Bryce Huff might be very good. Is he going to be Haason Reddick good? Haason Reddick changed the defense that year. I mean, he was a game wrecker for that team when they got to the Super Bowl. And guess what? They lost the Super Bowl because he couldn't get to the quarterback that day. On that day, Haason Reddick and
on that Terp, don't bring up horrible Terp stories.
I was going to say, for whatever reason, he didn't get home. But to get them there, he had, I think, one of the more underrated great Eagle defensive seasons. I mean, a guy with 18 and a half sacks.
It was what I say it all the time. It's one of the great seasons in franchise history. It completely wrecked the NFC Championship game.
Absolutely. So I said, Bryce Huff, he's got a big mountain to climb here to get over that thing. I don't know that him on his best is better than Haason Reddick. And is that good enough? Now, listen.
Now, here's where I differ, Mike.
Okay.
I don't think it's about Huff as much as it's about Nolan Smith. I think if they work things out with Haason Reddick, Bryce Huff is still playing a lot. He's still a big part of the rotation. He's still a big part of the plan.
Which, by the way, was his role with the Jets, more of a rotational player.
Yeah. Not the case with Nolan Smith. He's getting scraps when it comes to playing time if Haason is back. I think it's about more Nolan Smith and, from Howie Roseman's perspective, is that wishful thinking, or do you really believe this guy is going to be an impact player? He better really believe this guy's going to be an impact player. And sometimes it does take a year or two, especially for an undersized guy. He's got to get in the weight room. He's got to build up NFL strength. He had a procedure on his shoulder to fix that. So hopefully he's going to be healthy next year as well. I think he's betting big on Nolan Smith, Howie Roseman.
I don't disagree. Look, the guy got picked in the first round. There was a lot of, people excited about, you got another Georgia guy. And then, what ends up happening is the guy doesn't play as much as you want. And then everybody sours on him. Obviously, now I don't say obviously, but I think there is some truth to what you're saying, John, is, hey, we drafted this guy in the first round. We drafted him and we didn't think he was going to be there. He fell to us in this spot. And we think we got a guy that can change the dynamics of our defense. Well, whoever made the decision last year in his snap counts didn't see the same thing that you saw when you drafted him. Now, late in the year, you go to the playoff game, he had some of his most snaps of the season in that playoff game. So did they finally say, you know what, as the season went on, especially late, we saw more things, and now we realize we need to get this guy on the field more? That's a strong possibility. And guess what? Draft a guy in the first round, he better be able to play. Otherwise, that's another big miss. We were talking about the 2020 draft on my show, probably Monday, I guess it was. They drafted 11 guys in that draft. They got one guy on the team. You know who it is?
2020, they all run together.
Jalen Hurts. The one guy in the draft that everybody said, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
He's the only guy of the 11 that's still on the roster. That's a total miss. Now, they have another draft, 2018 with Mailata. They drafted 5 guys, and 4 of them are on the roster, and they're all pretty good. So, hey, but still, you draft 11 guys, and one guy is still on the roster. Nolan Smith.
Still holding out hope for Sean Bradley. He's not signed anywhere.
Sure. But Nolan Smith, if you look back at this draft 2 years from now, you're going to have, you better be like, hey, they drafted 2 guys in the first round. The other guy better be able to play, because the first guy's all right. The second guy didn't do much for you last year.
By the way, if you find a quarterback and you go 0 for 10 on the other guys, it's still good.
That's
not
true.
great. Not great. I'm not going to say it's great, but it's still good.
But Jalen's got to get back to franchise level. I'm not talking about MVP level, but franchise level better than he was last year. Then I'll go with you on that one, Johnny. Speaking of the draft, we're now just 2 weeks and 2 days away from the actual draft of this year. We'll see what Howie Roseman does, and we'll grade him 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now again. The Eagles, for me, and John likes to use this phrase, and it's a good one, draft-proofing the roster via free agency before the draft ever comes around. Try and have depth, try and have guys in position so you're not wholly drafting on need. Eagles have 8 draft picks. And guess what? I still see a bunch of needs. Maybe not starters, maybe not star players. They've got the majority of their starters in place, but they could use some depth. I don't love the depth on this team. How do you think Howie Roseman is going to use this draft, Mike Gill? Is he going to spread it around, take one guy at every position? Is he going to be able to stay true to his board? Because they have, for my estimate, like the only position that I don't think we should not even talk about them drafting a player is quarterback. They've got 4 quarterbacks on the roster. They've got their starter. They've got their backup. They've got their development guy. And then they got Will Greer because he knows the offensive coordinator a little bit. He's the 4th stringer. They're not taking a quarterback with one of their 8 picks, assuming they keep the 8. Is there another position where you go, well, they're definitely not taking a guy at this position? Because not for me. I think you can make a legitimate case for every position on the football field except for quarterback that the Eagles could use it one of those 8 drafts.
They're not taking a kicker.
No.
Okay.
That's it.
I should have said out of the 22. You're right, John. Thank you.
No, as you're saying that, I'm like, nope, they're not going to, they could take a guy there, pretty much all the way across the board. The one area that I find interesting is if they don't take a corner early in the first 50, they have 2 picks in the second round. In the first 53, and they could trade, but they have 22, 50, 53. If they don't take a corner in one of those 3 picks, they have so many guys that they have thrown a dart at in that room. Would they throw a dart at another guy in the 5th round and say, let's bring another guy in? I mean, you got the Eli Ricks and the Mekhi Gardners and the Kaylee Ringos. These are all guys that you have undrafted rookie free agent, 4th round picks, guys that you just keep accumulating. How many more guys do you want to keep? Would you say that's a waste of a pick? You got so many guys in there. Let them all kind of fight it out. Rodgers, they're hoping he gets reinstated. Maddox, they brought back. I'm sure in that group, the guy they just signed from, who was it? Vegas.
Vegas, yeah.
Yeah. So they have so many guys.
Yeah.
There you go. There's so many guys in that room. If they don't take a corner early, would you say, what are you taking another corner for? Or is that a position where they value so much, but not enough to take early that they just want more competition? That would be one spot if they don't get a corner early that they might not.
Right. But see, you covered yourself there. If they don't get a cover early, We just ran through all the positions. Oh, yeah, you could take a guy, then you could take a guy. Corner is first round.
Yeah,
If they take a corner first round, going to
absolutely.
potentially start, then guess what? They're taking a corner. Now, you're right. If they don't go corner first, you get down to the fourth through the sixth, whatever. No, you're right. They got a lot of guys already on the roster, depth guys that they want to take a shot with. You're right. It's either like very early or, yeah, that position's being skipped. But because you can potentially say they could make their first pick a cornerback, to me, that still makes cornerback a positional need.
There's not a spot on the roster except for quarterback, where because they signed my guy Will Greer, West Virginia, as another
very relevant to the 53 man. I'm joking.
Yeah, so they have some quarterback depth. They got 4 guys now there. They probably could use another 1 or 2 running backs. I don't know that they draft 2 running backs, but they'll probably take a guy somewhere. They got Barkley and Gainwell,
and that's it.
They got Lou Nichols and Ty Davis Price.
Yeah, there's a couple other randos on the roster that I don't know if you look at 53 guys. I mean, they could take a pass on wide out, maybe because they brought in like Paris Campbell.
Yeah, no way.
But
everything's involved. But
everything.
Guy, when you say draft proofing, that's not what it's about. Brian Billick's the first one who told me, and it's always stuck with me. He's not the first one to say it, I'm sure, but talent need is the worst talent evaluator in sports. By draft proofing, you're just trying to say, well, at least you have a contingency, so you don't feel the need to pick a certain position at a certain spot. So that's all they're trying to do. Not to say they don't have needs. Everybody has needs, and the Eagles have needs all over the place, but at least they have contingencies. Slot corner being a perfect example, coming off a year where it was a disaster. I think they learned from it. They get Abante back at a very cost-effective rate, but they also have Tyler Hall, who you mentioned, Mike. Zach McPherson's coming back. We don't even talk about Goodrich anymore. T1 Mullen. These are all natural slot corners, and none of them are going to bowl you over, but at least you say, all right, we're at least better equipped to handle that. You mentioned the outside corners, but I agree with you. If you can get a Quinyon Mitchell, I go, that would be my guy. That's who I focused in on. But if you can't get a corner at the top of the draft because it just doesn't work out that way and you go offensive line, and then you're talking about day 3, to your point, Mike, yeah, I don't necessarily want to add one because I already have Ringo and Rogers. You expect to be back, and Eli Ricks, and I already have a bunch of those guys.
Right, and Ricks was a guy who was a first round projection, and then he falls out of the draft, and then Ringo 4th round. You've got guys that you brought here because they were at a position you didn't deem that they would be. So you should have guys in that room that you think have enough talent that you wouldn't need to bring in a guy. Did they even have a 4th? Oh, they got the 4th round pick in the.
They got 120
in the trade with the quarterback Pickett. They swapped the 3rd for the 4th, so they do have a 4th now. They don't have a 3rd now, and they have a bunch of 5ths. So I don't need to see another corner in the 5th round. I got a couple guys in the 4th that from years past. But safety, Sidney Brown, he's not going to probably practice all that much. They got him in the draft. Blankenship, obviously, they brought back. They brought back C.J. Gardner. But other than that, Mekhi Gardner, maybe they don't have a lot of safety depth, I would think. But to answer your question, Jody, no, there's not a spot on the field where they should not address.
Except for quarterback, because
except for quarterback.
John just called
I
them.
think this is pointing towards the more and more, it's either they go with that corner, but I think that right guard spot and a versatile offensive lineman who could possibly replace Lane Johnson, maybe a guy that can bounce to play tackle, play guard for 2 years. That's where I think this is kind of lending itself down that road.
Which conceptually I completely agree with. Is there that guy who merits being taken at 22, who's that good and flexible that you think you could keep him inside for a period of time and then move him outside and he's going to replace Lane Johnson? That's a hell of an ask. You're putting a lot into that pick if that's what perfect best case scenario, yeah, that's exactly what they should do. Does that person exist? Checking all those boxes. I highly doubt it, but that's just me. I don't want to be a negative Nelly. But on John's point about contingency plans, I give you a football phrase that I learned, and I'd give credit to it. You gave credit to Brian Billick. I don't remember who said it to me. I'm doing an interview at one time, and somebody answered me and said, he's just a jag. And I didn't understand what the guy was saying. Like, excuse me? What are you talking about? Hey, jag.
Just
What do you mean by
guy?
Just a guy.
Just a guy.
Contingency plans need to be more than just a guy. And a live, able body is not a contingency plan for me. That's a jag, just a guy. And the Eagles have a couple on their future contracts right now that are jags. I'm sorry, they're just jags. They're not contingency plans, they're jags. And I know we're getting into the weeds about definitions here, but
I think all backups are like I look at Oren Burks. He's a guy we haven't talked a lot about, but to me, that's a good signing. That's a good backup linebacker. That's a guy who's been
I'd say he's more than a jag. Yes.
Yeah, I think he's a good special teams player. So that's what you want as a backup linebacker. Now, if he's forced to play as he was in the Super Bowl because Greenlaw tears his Achilles, it's not going to be as good. But I think it was a solid signing from the Eagles' perspective at a position where they clearly lack depth. I mean, we're counting on Nakobe Dean and Devin White to be the starters, and that's not a comfortable position to be in if you're
Zach Cunningham could be back if he's. I mean, I'm assuming no one's going to sign him. He's around training camp. Hey, come on back.
Well, he signed last year in August, so
right. Is he the safety that kept bringing back from Buffalo?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a chance that you bring guys like that back, especially if you suffer an injury in training camp as well. And then receiver, Paris Campbell, is he a jag? You could argue Devontae Parker at this stage of his career, is he a jag? Maybe, but they're better than what you have at least. And would I like to see another receiver?
What's the Paris Campbell? Who wanted to draft him?
The Eagles. Howie.
Was it?
Howie and Joe wanted to draft Paris Campbell.
Right.
And
they ended up with who? Rieger?
No. JJ Arthega-White.
JJ Arthega-White.
Right. Rager was Jefferson. That was a bigger mistake. I get a kick out of everybody battling back and forth. Who took Arcega-Whiteside? Who wanted Paris Campbell? Guess what? They both didn't work out. Paris has been a little bit better.
Yeah. Paris had a good season somewhere in there.
Nah, he had a serviceable one season over 5 years, which isn't good.
And the buzz for a while was that the guy who picked JJ Arcega-Whiteside was Jeff Lurie. That he was
no buzz to it. He steered him in that direction. And by the way, I think
Jeffrey has done well to steer that specific conversation in another direction. If JJ Arcega-Whiteside had turned into a player, you damn well would know that Jeff Lurie was involved in the drafting of Jay, because he turned out to be JJ Arcega-Whiteside. That conversation is kind of veered off the main drag.
I think he was enamored with JJ because he's such a smart kid and he interned for Condoleezza Rice. I honestly think that's what swayed. And he talked about his catching radius. He was a very good college player, though. He was tremendous in college. And it's not like the Eagles overdrafted him.
Is he still hanging around?
No, he's in the CFL last I looked.
Oh, man. Blocking for somebody else.
Yeah. Well, he moved to tight end. Atlanta was trying him at tight end, I think. Seattle. Back and forth as a receiver or tight end.
So did Jordan Matthews. We come full circle.
Yeah. Jordan Matthews. A smart guy, too. Smart guys.
Seinfeld episode, Jody.
Yeah, but there's one guy who won't be falling into that category is Greg Ward. They're not going to attempt to move Greg to tight end. He's not going to go somewhere else and try to reinvent himself. As
Greg's not a tight end.
Well, he already reinvented himself once. He was a quarterback.
That's true. Well, won't be trying it a second time with
great college quarterback, Greg Ward.
Very good. Yes. Here's one last Jag question for both you two guys, if you want to chime in. PJ Mustafa,
Yeah,
Jag or
He's a Jag.
contingency?
He's a Jag.
He's a Jag.
I mean, his brother's a good, but not his brother Sam is a starting center, has been. And he's a big guy.
Dude, yeah.
He's it's really hard to find, and I always say
An old school nose tackle.
yeah, well, that's the thing. Jordan Davis, and we were having this, like Jordan Davis doesn't play the same position as Jalen Carter and Milton Williams and Fletcher Cox. He's a old school nose tackle.
Sam Adams, Gilbert Brown.
Yes, I always say Haloti Nada because Haloti was picked at the top of the draft, 12, same range as Jordan. And I said at the time, Jody will tell you, I said day one, I said, this is a very esoteric pick, man. He ain't getting to the quarterback. This is about tying up blockers, stopping the run, and allowing others to make plays. I don't know if that's going to be good enough for the 13th pick in the draft. I think people are going to expect more, and that's kind of how it's gone. But
yeah, he plays a position where numerically it's tough to see his value.
Exactly. And he's been a good player. The conditioning's been a problem, but he's been a good player when he's out there stuffing the run. But they don't have a legitimate backup for him. Marlon is the backup for him, who's not. It's funny when you say a 305-pound guy's undersized, but he's undersized for that position for what you're asking Jordan Davis to do. PJ Mustafa is a little bit more equipped to do it. And Noah Ellis, Christian's brother, is back as well. He's like 340. He's more equipped to do it, but can they play it all? That's the question. Man, PJ's a Penn State guy, so maybe people get excited about that. Yeah. I know Jeff Mosher will, and Jeff Kerr will.
Good for those two guys. Can he play? That's all I care about. Don't care where he went to college. One more draft question for you, Mike, before we let you run. I asked you about we were talking about the positional needs for the Eagles and cornerback. They can either take one in the first round or they probably won't take one at all. You would think exactly the opposite at tight end. You don't think there's any shot they're going to take one in the first round because they got Dallas Goedert, but at some point, tight end depth, they need to take one in one of the picks over the course of the draft. Unless, of course, Brock Bowers is there at number 22. If Bowers falls all the way to 22 and other teams have, for varying reasons, decided to pass on him, and Howie Roseman says, how do I not? If you're putting a true board together, I personally have done this, and Brock Bowers is in my top 3 players in the draft. Just talented football players, no positional value tied to it and move up and down. Just rank the football players. I think he's the 3rd best football player in this draft. If he's available at 22, even if you have Dallas Goedert, can Howie Roseman pass on Brock Bowers if he falls that far down?
I would be very intrigued to see what would happen in that case. No, I don't see it happening. I guess the question would be, at what point in the draft would he drop to that Howie Roseman would think about making a call to get to that spot? If he's there,
I'm not even asking you to do that. You have to comes all the way down to 22 to you, Mr. General Manager. Are you passing on him like the 21 previously did?
No, at 22, if he's on the board, I think you got to take a sprint to the board and say, look, we're thinking tight end maybe in round 2 at 50, 53. The best guy we didn't think was here at 22. Best player available, we got to do it. So I think if he's there, I don't see that scenario. But if he was on the board at 22, I would be pretty surprised if he would have to be the best player available. No question asked at that spot.
I wouldn't even blink. I'd run the card up. But it was our buddy Mike Tannenbaum who said, who had the Eagles taking him at 22. And I'm like, I don't see how it happens.
But I also think there's a possibility that if he falls and he's at 15, 17, and that's when Howie starts to say, all right, this is now in play. I got to make some calls.
Well, Howie's always making calls. So.
Sure. Yeah. But that would be I don't know that they would wait for him to fall to 22. I think they would make the move to go aggressive to go get him.
At Mike Gill show, boy, that'd be fun too, because Dallas is still really good. And they have Brock Bowers. You know what? You don't need a third receiver then. Then it's up to Kellen Moore.
Right.
Brock Bowers, a lot of people are thinking about could be playing some wide, maybe.
Oh yeah, he's more of a flex guy than anything else. But I've seen the Kittle comparison a lot with Brock Bowers and the fact that he's a really good blocker, even though he's undersized and he's considered a flex tight end. If you can get George Kittle, you get George Kittle at 22. Even though George himself was, I think, maybe a 4th round pick. People missed on him.
Yeah.
At Mike Gill show, the Sports Bash, every day. If you're local in South Jersey, 2 to 6, 97.3. Kept you long, as we always do. Apologize, Mike, but I'll end it with Jalen Hurts, because we never talk about Jalen Hurts. We never talk about. There's been so much going on with the Kelsey retirements now, Fletcher, all the draft talk. Jalen's kind of skating under the radar, and partially, I mean, I think he's proven himself that he's a really good quarterback, but can he get back to where he was in 2022? Or I'll even say the first 10 games of 2023, because I think he was still playing at a very high level. If you told me those first 10 games, Mike, I say only thing he's got to do is clean up the turnovers, and then he's back to what he was. A little bit lacking explosion maybe in the running game. Where are you with Jalen Hurts?
Yesterday, we looked at his MVP odds, plus 1,600. He's got 7 players ahead of him, not including, but tied with Brock Purdy and Jordan Love at plus 1,600. I think he's hiding under the radar right now, obviously. But you know what's funny? Last year he sure wasn't. We were seeing him here, there, everywhere. He was doing this, that, and the other thing. Maybe this is exactly what he needed. Can he get back? You know, one of the things was he signed that big contract. And I remember him signing the contract and saying, me personally, he's one of them guys that I don't worry about with the money. You know, he's worked so hard. This has been his, it's like Cody Rhodes. He completed the story finally here, right? And he got the contract after getting benched and having to transfer and all sitting behind Wentz. And I think this is a much needed kind of down off season for him, where he is, as you're saying, no one's talking about him. He's out of the limelight, and that could be a really good thing. So do we say a bounce back year? I think it's a bounce back to get back to where he was in 2022. And I think we can at least expect him to be closer to that guy. Will he ever get back to that? You got to hope, right? You don't want to think he hit his peak already.
By the way, and we just got a question about 2022 being his ceiling. If that's his ceiling, that's fine. That's fine. You don't have to get better than that season.
Right.
If you can play up to that level.
You got to be dancing on that ceiling all the time.
Yeah,
if you're going to go by it, at least be at it.
Right, Jody, you're right. You might not say he's going to have a better year than that, but you want him to be in that circumference.
Yeah, you got to be in that range.
That's what makes you a great. When these guys that make these big deals, most of them, when they say, "Man, this guy's great," you're talking about him every year. It's because every year you know what to expect from him.
Yeah, that's why I call Peyton Manning the greatest regular season quarterback of all time. Obviously, Tom, because of the Super Bowls, and Tom's right there. It's like arguing 1A and 1B, but the consistency week to week, year to year. I always said about those Indianapolis teams, a bad year for them was 10 wins. You'd go in the season, well, they're going to win 10. The only question is, are they going to win 11? That's a bad season. 12, that's an average season. 13, 14, they're a little bit better than the 16-game season. That's how consistent he was when he hit his stride. That's what you're looking for.
Yeah,
Mike Gill, we appreciate you not only jumping on, but sticking around for as long as you do. Thank you very much for doing it today. What time's the Sports Bash start today?
2:00.
2 to 6.
93.7.
Somehow I fill 4 hours every day.
and he filled 45 minutes with us today. Thank you very much for doing so, Mike Gill. We will talk to you again next week.
All right, boys. See you.
Thanks, Mike.
Here with us on Birds 365. All right, quick timeout, Birds fans, and we'll be back. But before we go, let me tell you about how you can save some significant money. Birds fans, there's your chance to save up to 40% on your car insurance right now for one of JAKIB Sports' great partners. Here's what you need to do. Call one of their two outstanding managing partners, either Jim or Fran, and tell them you're a friend of both JAKIB Sports and Birds 365.
Hi, I'm Jim Muehlbronner, Managing Partner at Delval Insurance Group. Give us a call. We're a local, knowledgeable agency, not an 800 number. Go Birds!